Going live here tonight after the first week of fantasy football. Talking a little bit about the recap of the first week. We got my main man, Alex, Mr. 360 himself. What's going on tonight, Alex?
Man. Oh, man, I'm just glad to be here. It was a crazy first week of fantasy football, but I'll tell you what, that's part of it. A lot of highs and a lot of lows, but that's part of the experience as we all.
Absolutely. How did some of your picks play out as far as the waivers and some of the teams that you have?
Well, I was fortunate enough to grab Steve Johnson in free agency. It wasn't very popular amongst most people, but he ended up doing pretty well for me. And in my NFL.com league, it's one thing I learned is you really do got to know your league. NFL.com is a league where it places, I would say, a higher value on defenses. So I had Seattle's defense in 3 out of 4 leagues. In my Yahoo leagues, they would only give me about 13 points, pretty modest. But in NFL.com, I got about 26 points.
Wow.
So that is a major difference. But I think as NFL.com combines special teams with defense.
And you know what surprises me the most about that, Alex?
What?
Seattle lost the game.
Well, if they just would have passed it on an inside slant on 4th and 1, that would have happened, right?
Well, then Pete Carroll's looking back a year ago at the Super Bowl, and he's thinking he has to run it.
I know. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I really don't blame either play call in the Super Bowl or there. I mean, I guess it is kind of weird how they ran a draw play and they only needed a yard. There's just some weird play calling there, man. But what do I know? I'm just on the outside looking in. But
speaking of weird play call, what about the Giants at the end of the Dallas game choosing to throw and not try and run out the clock a little bit longer on 3rd and 4th down, leaving the Cowboys potentially at the 1-yard line with 40 seconds, having to drive 99 yards?
Well, I mean, that's what happens when you try and get cute, right? They tried to be cute. They tried to I guess they tried to put the dagger in it, but they didn't just try and put a dagger in it. They tried to viciously do it, but you got to be smart about some things. They just don't. Common sense just shouldn't leave you all of a sudden when you want to be cute, and it is what it is. What can you say? That's just what happens. I think that's what happened with Pete Carroll in the Super Bowl too. I think they tried to be cute. Look what happens.
I agree. So, Alex, what I want to talk to you tonight about here, and I think that some of the viewers that may end up listening, injuries. We saw Dez Bryant projected anywhere from 4 weeks all the way up until Thanksgiving. We've got T.Y. Hilton, who, although passed the MRI, looking like a bruise to his knee.
DeSean Jackson.
DeSean Jackson, we're looking at 4 weeks with a hamstring. We've got 2 to 3 weeks with Andre Ellington on the PCL on his knee. What do you make of that?
Again, what did I say at the beginning of the show? It's part of the experience. It's part of the game. Injuries happen. I had Jordy Nelson drafted my 2nd round in one of my leagues, and look what happens. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. I think also what's frustrating, especially with like DeSean Jackson owners, is that he just put up a goose egg his first week too. Combine that, he's going to be out 6 weeks. DeSean Jackson went maybe between a 3rd and 5th round. Those rounds are very important. You invested a lot in DeSean Jackson, obviously Dez Bryant too. So especially I think in the NFL now, where wide receivers are so crucial to your fantasy game, you really got to hit that waiver wire. You might even have to take some major risks. Because when you have someone like a DeSean Jackson or a Dez Bryant out, and especially when you draft them in the first 5 rounds, Des Bryant average one first or second round, that can kill your whole team. It really can. So you got to go out there. You got to do research, especially if you're already thin at wide receiver. You have to.
Right, right. Now, Alex, I'm a fantasy owner of Des Bryant. I watch a crucial injury. First, he goes to the locker room, kind of like LeBron, a little dehydration, comes out IV'd up, and then he's followed up by going back to the locker room to find out he's going to be getting some screws in his feet. I'm a Des Bryant owner. What do you suggest I do, given the fact that I'm looking at a team of – I'm already thin at wide receiver. I do have Julio, who managed to backpack me for a first week victory. But outside of that, I'm looking at Brandon Cooks. Do I trade Dez, or do I look to preserve him and see what I can muddle around with on the waiver wire until his potential return in 12 weeks?
See, this is really tricky. Now, if you lost your first week, you're going to be higher on the waiver wire. You might be able to pick a decent wide receiver or two up in free agency. Now, at the same time, Dez being out for quite some time, I think you owe it to yourself I think you have to field offers. Now, when Des Bryant went down, I actually got a lot of offers to my own team offering to give me Des Bryant in exchange for some middle of the pack wide receivers. I was being sold on the fact that when Dez comes back, that's going to help my team a lot. I think it's pretty telling when people want to get rid of Des Bryant, though, for a mid-level receiver, even if he is out for half a season or something along those lines. But you don't get rid of him unless it's the right deal. You do not get rid of him unless you have a solid wide receiver or two coming back with the trade. Because receivers like Des Bryant, like after Calvin Johnson, Des Bryant, and Jordan Nelson was healthy, after that first stack of wide receivers, who else is there? I mean, this is what I'm saying. It's so crucial. You really got to pull something out here.
And that I guess is my what I'm really looking at here is, so you've got Dez going down. His return is anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks, which is a very vague timetable. He's tweeting out on Twitter that he's going to be back much earlier than they're reporting, but I think that that's more of his own
optimism.
Yes, I think that any player wants to have the mindset of, Adrian Peterson after an ACL injury. Let's be honest. Des Bryant, he's a great athlete, but if you look at Kevin Durant, although a different sport, a foot injury is a foot injury.
Well, that's the thing too. This is different than just a hamstring injury or something, an injury to a part of your body that doesn't affect your speed. And once your speed goes, it's gone. You don't get it back. I'm not saying Des Bryant's going to lose his speed, but when you get a foot injury, I think that's even more significant than a leg injury too. So honestly, this year, I would probably do my best to shop Dez. And me, for example, I drafted Martavius Bryant, so I have him coming back in 4 weeks. That inclined me to turn down some deals in order for Dez Bryant. But this is what I'm saying. We have Kelvin Benjamin, gone. Jordy Nelson, gone. Dez Bryant, gone. Deshaun Jackson, gone. It's just the wide receiver market already. It's just blow after blow after blow, and a lot of wide receivers like Sammy Watkins putting up goose eggs. There's just nothing solid out there. So honestly, if you're trying to shop Des Bryant, you might want to look at another strategy. If you absolutely cannot get at least a middle of the pack wide receiver, maybe See if there's maybe any decent running backs you could field, or if you don't have a solid quarterback, see what you can get for him. Just the odds are, people in a lot of fantasy football leagues, the odds are you're going to find a deal. You're going to find an owner who's going to take a chance. So I would throw in the towel on Des Bryant just for this particular year.
Okay, so we're looking at throwing in the towel on Des Bryant. What's the absolute minimum value? And you can give me, a player that maybe has a high ceiling, some high upside. Even looking at like a Coleman out of Atlanta, or a Coleman out of New Orleans. But tell me a few people that you would field as a Des Bryant owner for a trade. Knowing that he could be back in 4 weeks, and you're looking at giving up a first or second rounder for a guy that may have been heavily coveted off the waiver wire early, or you could be giving up Des Bryant, who's not going to be set to return, and even if he does return, who knows how he's going to produce. But are we going to be fielding offers like a Sammy Watkins?
Well, honestly, you're asking who I'm looking at, who I'm excited about. I'm actually excited for Percy Harvin. I mean, I know Sammy Watkins is there, but you got to like what you saw out of him week 1. Actually, I'm really impressed by the Bills in general. I mean, that team looked ready to play. That offense looked jacked, not just the defense. So, honestly, 1 week, is it a big enough sample size? No. However, if it's not Percy Harvin, one person I really like, and I liked him before week 1. I picked him up in the majority of my fantasy leagues in the later rounds. Kendall Wright from Tennessee. He had a great game. And I said this pre-draft. I made it known I was going to go after him. A lot of owners didn't believe me. A lot of people didn't even know who he was. But down in Tennessee, who else they got? Who else on that wide receiver front is going to make that big of an impact?
Well,
Kenny Britt, I don't think.
If you look at the wide receiver, you got the young Dorian Beckham-Green. You've got the tight end, which, as we know, most rookie quarterbacks tend to favor early on with Delaney Walker.
Mm-hmm.
Justin Hunter just beat his aggravated assault case, so he's going to look to play a role in that offense. I think that there's value there at the wide receiver position. Kendall Wright, I think, definitely, bar none, is the standout of the group. So I definitely think that Mariota surprised me with his performance. And Kendall Wright's, definitely going to capitalize off of, how well he did. Do I think Mariota can continue it game after game? No, I think that the Buccaneers are probably going to be looking at a first pick overall, right up there with Cleveland again.
As usual.
Because it's really a rough spell for, those teams, unfortunately, but I definitely do. I do like Kendall Wright. I think that he was one of the people that you could have got closer to the 8th, 9th round, maybe even the 12th, if people were, depending on who you're drafting with. And I think that, that in itself, depending on where you got him, that he definitely holds some value.
Right. Now, as far as Mariota goes, I made it known on social media. I really like the guy. I obviously, I know he's not going to throw for 4 touchdowns every game, and I know he played against the Buccaneers defense, but he kind of reminded me a little bit of Cam Newton back in 2011. He threw for 400 yards in his first 2 games. This is just a different time, the different style of play, spread offenses. Mariota that first week, that's big for a rookie. That's even if it's against a lowly team like the Bucs, that's your first NFL game. He was going up against the number 1 draft pick in Jameis Winston, so it definitely builds confidence. I'm not saying go out and pick him up and put him in your starting lineup, but I definitely think that's a spark down there in Tennessee. And if Mariota's firing on cylinders, obviously the rest of the offense is too.
So let me ask this here, Alex. Out of Give me your 5 biggest surprises of week 1 and your 5 biggest disappointments.
Oh man, I have so much on each end. I was really, obviously, I was surprised with Marcus Mariota, so that was one. I was also surprised with Kendall Wright. Again, speaking with the Titans, I was surprised about Bishop Sankey. So there's 3 players right down in Tennessee that I was pleasantly surprised with. Surprised. I'll put Percy Harvin at number 4, and number 5. I actually was really surprised with Heath Miller from the Steelers tight end. Now he's not going to do that every week, but keep in mind with Martavis Bryant out for 4 weeks. Just by how things work, he's going to be targeted more often. He got me 18 points in my NFL league. So I was really surprised with those 5 players, and 3 of them coming from Tennessee. Biggest disappointments, this will be easy. Sammy Watkins, Deshaun Jackson, Des Bryant going down, although you can't blame him for an injury. I was actually really disappointed with Peyton Manning. I know he didn't have the greatest preseason, but he averaged 4 points in fantasy leagues. Jeez Louise. I forgot to add Carlos Hyde to my surprises. I think he surprised everyone, so we'll put him in somewhere in the top 5, top 6. Disappointed. I was actually really disappointed with Danny Amendola. Again, that's just week 1, but both you and I had high expectations of him, and I think we both still do. So I have, 2 more disappointment left?
Yeah.
Jeez. There's so much. I don't know how to rank them, but I would say I was actually kind of disappointed with C.J. Anderson too. But again, going up against the Ravens defense, although the Ravens defense now losing Terrell Suggs, that's a big blow. And I also was kind of disappointed with Eric Decker. Both you and I had him as having we're giving him a shot for a decent flex starting position this week, but again, there's so many disappointments and surprises, but those are 5 from each that I think stick out the most to me.
Okay, yeah, I mean, as far as Decker goes, I thought overall he had a pretty solid game. I know that New York's going to struggle, but they did play a weak Cleveland team. I believe Decker, although he only had 2 receptions, he did get a touchdown, and we do know that, from a fantasy standpoint, if they can get you a touchdown and 40 yards, you're looking at a 10-point game. So Decker actually, he doesn't fall on my disappointment list, but he doesn't fall on didn't make much of an impression either.
Well, I had him in some PPR leagues. I'm in some leagues where receptions and yardage can all sometimes overshadow touchdowns, so maybe I had just too high hopes for him.
So I'll start with the guys that kind of surprised me week 1. Number 1 is going to be Tyler Eifert out of Cincinnati. I think that when you look at an offense that is going to be a ground game team, and they're going to try and really establish that run game early. Jeremy Hill, he got his 2 touchdowns. Giovanni Bernard certainly looked like the more elusive back on that day.
He's going to get better as the season goes on. Just watch.
Yeah, I think Jeremy Hill's he's a workhorse. I think he's one of those guys that really, 19 carries is nothing for Jeremy Hill. You give him 30 carries and he's going to keep trucking.
Right.
But for Giovanni Bernard to have less than half the carries and the same amount of yards, Giovanni Bernard might be somebody to look for, as a potential trade guy, at least from a PPR standpoint, because along with the 8 attempts for 63 yards, he also had 6 receptions.
Right. And again, it's just the whole package deal too, especially if you're in a PPR league. Those six receptions mean a lot. Uh, so as time goes on, I really like Bernard, and he was rated, I would say, in most formats, whether ESPN or NFL or Yahoo. He was rated between 27 and 30. So he he didn't really go, I would say, until the middle rounds, but I actually do think you're right with the trade value too. So if you're thinking of making a trade for a player like Giovanni Bernard, I would do it now, honestly, because you're going to trade for not what has that player done, but what he will do for me. And if he has momentum, if people are curious about him, I'd start fielding offers for him right now, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that to kind of go with my Eifert comment with upside, I think that you touched base on it earlier with Carlos Hyde. Um, I wasn't really sure how the Niners were going to play out this year. I didn't really have a whole lot of faith in them. I saw them lose a lot of guys over the course of the preseason. The debacle with Harbaugh. There's just a lot of different things that were not playing into their favor, and
Mm-hmm.
Minnesota looks really, really bad. And Mike Wallace, he played a pretty good game. But outside of that, I didn't see anybody on Minnesota that stood out. You're giving Peterson the ball 10 times, and
That's bad.
you know
That is so bad.
you got Rudolph and Mike Wallace. They got theirs, but they just didn't seem to have any consistency. Carlos
Well,
was definitely probably the player of the week in my eyes. Next to who I thought, and I'm going to hold true to it. Matt Forte will have a down year. I think that the Packers defense was exposed, and I think that the Bears offense is going to rely on Forte early until everybody does get up to par. As far as health is concerned.
well, going back to the Vikings, I mean, they've been rebuilding since 2009. I think the year Brett Favre led them to the NFC Championship game, and I still like Teddy Bridgewater. I think he he has options. Adrian Peterson there, Rudolph, Mike Wallace, but that whole team, their whole foundation right now is really shaky. But if they can get things better, if they can get things kind of solidified, Adrian Peterson will go back to being Adrian Peterson. Mike Wallace has talent. There's no doubt about that. And I actually really like Kyle Rudolph, but for this point in time, I'm not really putting any high hopes on any Viking players. Um, I'm not jumping on the 49er bandwagon just yet. Colin Kaepernick is 5-0 in Monday Night Football games. Obviously, Carlos Hyde had that great game. Um, so let's keep things in perspective. Week 1, obviously, if I am a Niner fan, if you are a Niner fan, that is encouraging. I'm not going out and picking up Cap or anyone um, like that just yet, but as far as Forte and the Packers guy, I think you really hit the nail on the head. Um, so as far as all those teams, none of them have really surprised me. I've kind of just things are playing out as expected, I would say, with the exception of Carlos Hyde. Even though I expected the Niners to win, for him to put up the stats that he did, even if it's against a inferior Vikings team, that's really impressive, and that's really encouraging for fantasy owners, I believe.
I agree, and I think that also, although he didn't get a touchdown, especially in PPR format, Keenan Allen.
Mm-hmm.
I had him last year in one of my leagues, and I think that the sophomore slump hit him probably harder than anybody else, and it kind of gave me I kind of steered clear of him. I didn't really acquire him in too many drafts. I was kind of falling more in line with the DeAndre Hopkins, who had a really good game, the Jordan Matthews, who had a really good game. Although I think he was robbed of a touchdown. That's
I think that the Brandon Cooks was kind of a disappointment week one. And I'm not even sure that New Orleans really looks like they know what they're doing, or Breeze looks like he knows who his guy's going to be. I think that he relied on Jimmy Graham for so long that you might even see more of a run game established in New Orleans.
Right. I actually was in one league where Drew Brees fell to the 6th round for me, and he was rated a third best quarterback in most leagues. So I was quite pleased. But like you said, the Saints kind of seem to be figuring out what their identity is. So definitely more of the same, but also different with Graham not being there. I like Brandon Cooks.
Let me put something in perspective for you, Alex. Who do you think led the team in receptions for New Orleans?
I would say it wasn't Cooks, was it?
Mark Ingram.
Mark Ingram. That is very interesting.
He had
running backs leading the interceptions.
8 receptions for 98 yards.
Wow.
So
that's a pretty telling statistic. Again, even though for it being week one, you have a running back who could be targeted that often in games. This is going to be a very unique Saints offense moving forward.
And I think once they get a healthy C.J. Spiller back, that you'll see some of those receptions go to him, and Mark Ingram will carry more of the load on the offensive end as far as with the carries.
Right. The whole dynamic's going to change. I mean, I still think, as far as your identity, I still think they're obviously still a passing team, but Mark Ingram, I feel like, is an exceptional running back. They're going to want to get that typical running game established, and I think they're going to want to find a balance. And I think when Spiller comes back, I think the whole offense will balance out for the most part. I feel Brandon Cooks is too talented for him not to be the leading receiver. I have such high expectations of him this year. And he had pretty modest. He had a pretty modest week one.
Mm-hmm.
His teammate Coleman, I believe, had a touchdown.
Yeah.
And 6 or maybe 4 to 6 receptions, something like that. So again, they're feeling it out. Week one, you're feeling it out, but I think going forward, especially when Spiller comes out, you're going to see a pretty smooth, efficient Saints offense, like they've been for such a long time now. So I like when I take a look at players I want on my team, I want players from an efficient offense. And that sounds obvious for the most part, but a lot of times fantasy owners will go after players who aren't even on an efficient offense but are still the focal point of the team. I would rather have a player on my team that's a second or maybe even a third option but still play for a high-passing offense. I mean, look at James Jones down in Green Bay. He just got picked up, and he made fantasy owners happy.
Very true, very true. But do you take, James Jones, who's in a potent offense, as a third receiver over, somebody like DeAndre Hopkins, who's in an offense that, can barely stay afloat, doesn't know who their starting quarterback is, and is basically waiting for Arian Foster to get healthy before they can even establish a run game?
Perfect example. I take James Jones. I do. I'm a guy. I always say this in my podcast. In our podcast, it's just the nature of the game. If you're in an offense that's really efficient, you're going to get your fair share of balls thrown your way. And if you're running back, you're obviously going to get your fair share of touches. And if you're a quarterback, you're going to put up a decent amount of passing touchdowns. So I would rather choose a guy like a James Jones who is part of a machine that's really potent, even if it means being a second or third option, compared to being a player on an offense that's really stale. I mean, what's the point? I mean, it's a team game. That's just the way I look at it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's certainly a good argument. I think that, when you have a playmaker like DeAndre Hopkins, and he is the focal point, similar to Julio Jones on Byron Maxwell, and although the comparison is hard to make, DeAndre Hopkins is he's a top 10 receiver. He is, there's question marks at the quarterback position, but Ryan Mallett, when he was in New England and in the right system, he succeeded. And I think DeAndre Hopkins is the type of player that is just a natural playmaker. And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And I just think that, if James Jones would have started the season out with the Packers, I still don't think that he would have been drafted ahead of DeAndre Hopkins. I don't think that you're going to see James Jones. He's going to be a heavily waiver target if he's not been acquired already. But I think the upside for DeAndre Hopkins, given that he isn't going to be sharing touches with Devontae Adams, he isn't going to be sharing touches with Randall Cobb, he isn't going to be dealing with Eddie Lacy. I think that those are the things that I believe Cobb actually led all of Green Bay in red zone targets last year. So I mean, my concern would be, do I take a guy in an offense that maybe is a little bit more stagnant, but at the same time, I think that he's just got the playmaking ability to make things happen. And sometimes, especially if they get from behind, they're going to force feed him. And playmakers make plays, and I think that he ends up producing at a high level this year.
I definitely cannot disagree with anything you've just said there. Everything you said there was true. However, let me ask you this: who would you say is the best wide receiver in the NFL right now?
Well, with Des Bryant being hurt, I have Julio number 1. I've got Antonio Brown, and this is just from a fantasy standpoint.
Correct.
I got Antonio Brown 2. I think 3, I will go with Demaryius, although he had a poor outing week 1. I think that similar to last year, he'll bounce back. Then I got to go with Odell Beckham and Megatron.
Mm-hmm. Now put one of those receivers on the worst offense, at least from week 1 they can think, whether it be the Buccaneers or the Browns or whoever. Jameis Winston throwing to Antonio Brown.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's obvious that amazing playmaker who put up 123 catches, I could see it going down to 40 catches, maybe 600 yards, 2 touchdowns. It's kind of like the whole Randy Moss thing when he was with the Raiders. He had, 500 receiving yards, goes to New England 2007, end of story. Now, that might be an extreme example, but the best players don't always produce because sometimes they're in a bad environment where the quarterback isn't ideal, the whole offense isn't firing. Again, that might be extreme example, but let's say I would take someone like a James Jones over Hopkins in Houston, who the quarterback situation's unsettled. Now, if the situation becomes settled out going down the road, Foster comes back, Hoyer starts playing better, whoever's throwing him the ball, then we have a different story. So you could be, I feel like, the best receiver, but if you're in an offense that has no chemistry, very little, it doesn't hold much value for me in fantasy. That's just my argument. I'm not saying it's the best, but I just feel more confident. I feel more confident in getting a decent chunk of points from a second or third option in an offense that's more high firing.
Okay, so you're looking at high octane offenses. We'll start with Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan Matthews, great game. Zach Ertz had a nice game. Sam Bradford looked good in the second half. Nelson Aguilar kind of was talked up for a while. He was supposed to be the rookie stud in a high octane offense that was going to produce, and he I believe is right up there on the lines of the Deshaun Jackson, Sammy Watkins goose egg.
Mm-hmm.
he may have gotten a point or two. Let me take a look here.
Well, it kind of sounds like he's more than a second or third option, at least from that week one. I mean, you're
Yeah.
listing all those guys who had great games, and then even look at DeMarco Murray. I think he had 9 rushes for 8 yards or something like that.
Yeah, 8 rushes for 9 yards.
So yeah, I mean it's something to consider. Like I said, I feel like second or third options different compared when you're on an offense where you might not even be looked at. So again, I actually, especially like DeMarco Murray, I had high hopes for him this year, and he still might pan out. But I mean, if you're a DeMarco Murray owner, oh my goodness, that has to be disappointing. I should have put him on my top 5 list for disappointments. I don't even know why I didn't think of him.
Yeah, but I mean, you look at DeMarco Murray. So in reality, if we're looking fantasy, I'm looking disappointing to me is a guy that doesn't deliver numbers.
Mm-hmm.
DeMarco had 8 attempts for 9 yards, but he had 2 touchdowns and 4 receptions. So,
made up for it.
Right. So, I mean, in that aspect, I think the disappointments are going to fall more on the Lamar Millers, the C.J. Andersons, the Justin Forsetts. Those are the guys that, really underperformed. And, C.J. Anderson, and we'll talk about this more later tonight when we get the group
Dotson comes in.
But
right.
I think that if you have not already got, Ronnie Hillman, that this is looking very, very eerily similar to Monte Ball of last year if this continues. I don't know. I don't even know that Hillman shouldn't have had the job to begin with coming into the season. He had a much better preseason. He had a great season when he was healthy last year. And I'm not necessarily sold that C.J. Anderson was worth a first rounder.
Mm-hmm.
Him and LaShawn McCoy, I avoided like the plague, along with Forte, which he kind of, proved me wrong week 1.
Well, you weren't the only one there, so don't feel bad.
Yeah, so I mean, those are 2 guys that, really McCoy and Anderson that I wanted to make sure I treaded lightly. Joseph Randall, that was a question mark, and I think that he kind of silenced the critics in some aspects. But they also went with Dunbar a lot in the passing game. They all looked good. So I don't see anybody being a 3-down back by any means. But I think that really Ronnie Hillman's got to be somebody that if he's floating out there, I'm stashing him because he is 1B to 1A for C.J. Anderson. And if C.J. Anderson has another down game and they continue this, this offense that Peyton Manning looks so uncomfortable in, I think, he can't take the ball under center. He needs to take it out of the shotgun. They're not doing that. And I think Kubiak's going to work to try and change it. But I think that you're going to see Hillman take that role once again from C.J. Anderson at some point in the season.
Well, I drafted C.J. Anderson in the second round in one of my leagues that I invested a lot of money in. So obviously that is a very big concern for me. Second round, I invested a lot in the guy, and we just got done talking about highly efficient offenses. On paper, the Broncos should have it, but right now, like you said, Manning looks uncomfortable, no chemistry. C.J. Anderson now, Hillman looks like Hillman's going to be taking away a lot of those carries. I mean, it's very frustrating for a fantasy owner. Again, it's part of the game, but I just feel like that whole offense in general, like it's going to have to start clicking eventually. Kubiak, changes things down there, then expect Manning to go back to at least his old form from last year. Expect Anderson to pick it up. So right now, I would say the whole Broncos offense right now is a big question mark. If I have C.J. Anderson, I might even have him do. I wouldn't say I'd have him bench for next week, but you have to start to wonder. I mean, is it worth risking benching him if you have a decent backup? It's just those are the type of fantasy scenarios that terrify owners because you invest so much in them. You invest your time, you invest your money, you invest a lot of effort into it. So I honestly don't know. The more I think about it, the more research I do, there's no answer. There's nothing in sight to make me think that may convince me to start him or bench him.
So would you consider Mullen, should he have another performance like this, like last week? Would you consider trading him for, a running back of lesser value that maybe has some more upside? Maybe pairing like an Abdullah with maybe like a Macklin or a stronger receiver, or do you expect him to bounce back?
Well, like I said, I feel like their offense has so many weapons they'd have to bounce back. But remember earlier in the show, I talked about getting value for trades when people like Des Bryant or whoever goes down. So I might even start thinking trades right now. That might be. I understand it's week one. It might be a stretch, but also everything we just talked about from Kubiak and the offense. It's a real possibility that he will disappoint fantasy owners everywhere. So I'm not saying I would do this, but I wouldn't blame a fantasy owner if they put him on the trading block and see if you can get in return. I might even just take, like you said, an Abdullah or a mid-level receiver like a Macklin for him.
Now, we'll go. I'll go ahead and ask you this last question here, and then we'll take an intermission. Jake Long. Long list of injuries history. He is expected to sign with the Atlanta Falcons.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that although they've tried in the offseason to do some things to their defense, Philadelphia does not have a strong defense.
Mm-hmm.
And, Tevin Coleman saw the bulk of the carries with 20 attempts, 80 yards on the ground. And, although he wasn't targeted in the receiving game like Devontae Freeman, do you think Long, is going to help with Coleman's overall value? And do you see Atlanta being a more balanced offense with, maybe a strong run game with Tevin Coleman to pair with, Roddy White and Julio Jones?
Oh, well, I think a lineman such as him drastically improves your offense. I mean, the line is so underrated and underlooked. I mean, obviously you don't deal with offensive linemen in fantasy football, but when you're a running back, your men up front, man, they are just as much part of your success as you are yourself if you're a running back. So, yeah, if he can stay healthy, if he doesn't get injured, if he doesn't, that's an if, then yes, oh, absolutely. I think that makes such a big deal. I really, really do. So that is something to think about moving forward.
And I know I said we were going to go to an intermission, but I do want to throw one more thing out there. Two guys. Todd Gurley has yet to be ruled out for week 2. Granted, he would be on a snap count if he were used. What are your thoughts on his upside, and what do you make of the Colts? Having some interest in Ahmad Bradshaw. Is that somebody that might be worth a flyer? Or do you think that given the off-season acquisition, that Gore is the guy to have?
Well, I mean, we obviously traded for Gore. Me and you swapped for Gore. I wasn't really impressed at all in any way of what he did for me this week. But again, like I said, even though the Colts have a offense that's very explosive this week, it got, I would say, pummeled by the Bills. So I don't know. Honestly, with those guys, Gurley, Gore, and all of them, I need more of a sample size in week 1. I really don't want to go tell our viewers anything that make them go pick up those guys or try and get rid of them. Honestly, those guys are just a question mark. I really, when it comes to something like that, I need a bigger sample size. I really do. Ahmed Bradshaw, I wouldn't even waste my time with him. I really wouldn't. I don't like running backs who are getting up there in age.
He's 26 with 2 bionic legs and was a top 12 running back last year.
Well, maybe I'm thinking of someone else then.
And we'll return and we'll provide our viewers with some who we like for waiver wire targets, and who might be the eye in the sky, so to speak, to get you the win for the next week.